Hello all. Today we will show a practical example of how to communicate with the player and add user interface widgets to the player's screen. Let's jump in. Let's jump into a new level. File, new level, basic. And let's create our blueprints first, and then we'll discuss how they will communicate with each other to accomplish our goals. In the content drawer, right-click, new blueprint of type actor. Let's call this BP underscore widget zone. Right-click. Let's create a blueprint interface. Let's call this BPI underscore widget management. Let's right-click again, new blueprint class, and we will make an actor component. Let's call this BPC for blueprint component underscore widget communicator. And let's right-click one more time and go to user interface widget blueprint. And we'll use this class up here, user widget. And we'll call this WBP for widget blueprint on screen text. And let's save. Before we jump in, let's talk about how these blueprints will communicate with each other. First, we'll house some information like a few items of text on the blueprint. We will overlap a collision volume, and the player will have a blueprint component on it of the type we just created, the widget communicator. We will use a blueprint interface to communicate with that blueprint component from this blueprint. And then on the player's blueprint component, we will take that information and we will create a widget, and then we will add it to the player's screen. And we'll use those text items to set bound variables on the widget to display it on the screen. And we'll do a similar process to remove the widget. So let's jump in. Let's start by editing our blueprint interface. We'll double click. We'll change new function to the function show widget on client. And we will we'll create another function. And this is remove widget on client. I pressed Control D to duplicate, but you can also use the plus sign up here. In our show widget on client function, let's add two variables. Let's call this primary text of type text, and we'll create another variable, and this will be called secondary text of type text. Great. Let's continue. Next, we will add our blueprint component to our player character. Let's search character at the top level of our directory. And here we can find our third person character right at the top. I'll open this up. I'll click add component and I will type widget communicator. And now this component exists on our third person character. So this component on its own has the ability to add functionality, and we could put this on many different types of blueprint and repeat that functionality if we wanted to. So I'm going to go back to my blueprints, and let's first add some logic onto our widget zone blueprint. So I will start by adding a new component, which will be a box collision. And we want a series of events for this. So let's right click and say add event, add on event begin overlap, and we'll say on end overlap. So what we want to do is we want to test our actor to see if it has the blueprint component that we just added. And so let's say get component by interface. So we could use a variety of things to, we could say get component by class. So either of these will work. In this situation, I'm just going to put this interface on it, and we'll go from there. So the interface is widget management. So BPI widget management, the one we just created here. And I'll say get a copy. And I'll say is not empty. And what we're going to do is we're going to just collapse this to a function. So we're going to say, we're going to right click, collapse to function, and say test for widget manager. Let's open this up. So this input is going to be the actor we're testing. And let's right click over here and say add return node. And so we're basically gonna pull this out here. So we're gonna say the Boolean means is a valid array, and this is going to be the component. So back up in here, we'll pull off this, and we're going to compile. We'll say branch. If it's a valid array, we're going to pull off of this, and we're going to execute the interface event we created. So we'll go back and refer to what we called it. So it's called show widget on client. And so I will right click here and say show widget on client, and this is our blueprint interface. And so if it's a valid array, let's call this event on that component that we just found, and we're going to pass on some information. So let's pull off here where it says primary text. We'll promote this to a variable. We'll promote secondary text to a variable, and then we'll expose both of these variables for this blueprint. What we can do now is we can copy this logic right here, this function that we've just created. We'll pull it down here. So we're going to execute the same test that we just sort of put into this function here. So we're going to say this actor overlapped this box. Does it have a component that has the interface that we created? If so, we're going to pass that forward, and we're going to run this blueprint interface function on it. And down here, we're going to run the remove widget on client. So I'll right click here and say remove widget on client, and I'll pass this in here. So this is our our exit zone. This is when we enter zone, the collision zone. And so that is good there. Oh, let's add this component here. Now we're good. Great. Now let's add the logic in our widget communicator. Let's double click, and we will go to class settings. In our implemented interfaces section, under class settings, we'll click add, and we'll say BPI underscore widget management. Now we have access to these interface events that we set here. So I will right click and say implement event for both of these events we've created. And as you can see here now, the input that we set in our function here can now be passed forward here when we call it from the widget zone. So the interface allows us to put this function call on any blueprint. In this situation, we're putting it on the blueprint component that lives on the character. And so now let's add some function for this logic on the widget communicator blueprint component. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'll say get owner. And this is saying this is the owner of this component. So in this situation, it's the character. I'll pull off and I'll say cast to character. And then from the character, I need to get controller. So I need to get a reference to the controller that owns this pawn. I need to make sure that it is a player controller. So I cast to a player controller. I'll pull off here. And now that I have a player controller, I can create widget. And I will create a widget of the class type that we made before. So I'll add that right here. I will cache this as our cached widget. So I have a reference to it later so I can tear it down. And then I will say add to viewport. I'm going to leave a little bit of space right here because I'm going to come back in a little bit once we've created our widget blueprint, and we'll edit some variables right here. Now let's tear this down. Once we call this event, which is what happens when we exit the zone. So when we exit the zone, we're going to get that component that we're working on now. Say remove widget on client. And what we're going to do is we're going to get a reference to our cached widget. I'll say get. I'm going to use a validated get. That is the same as saying is valid to do that test. So this is an identical execution. So I'll pull this into here. If it's valid, which we should only really be tearing it down if it's valid, we will grab the widget and say remove from parent. And I will invalidate this widget reference. This is our remove, and this is our add. Let's compile and save. Let's jump over quickly to our widget. I'll open this up. And this is going to be a simple widget. So what we'll do is we will add a canvas panel. I'll drag it down here. On top of that, I like overlay panels just because you can layer things and they're pretty forgiving. So I'm going to change the anchors of the overlay to the extents, and I'll say 0, 0 so that it stretches the offset right and bottom. You know, we're going to change those to 0, 0 is what I just did. And let's add a vertical box. We're going to, let's see. Let's actually make our overlay. We're going to do this version, and this set of anchors. And we will zero this out. We're going to make this 500 in size, and then we're going to change this alignment to 1. And then we're going to grab our vertical box, and we will center it out. And let's add 2 text blocks in here. So we're going to drag a text here. And then I'm going to duplicate that by doing Control D after I've selected it. And let's grab both of these, and we will center out the justification down here. And we will increase the line height percentage. And we'll make that 1.5. And we'll boost the text just a little bit. And we'll keep it at 30, just like that. Awesome. So this is going to be our primary text. This will be our secondary text. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our graph, and I'm going to create 2 variables. So I'm going to click the plus sign here and say primary text. Let's change this to a text variable. And then I'm going to Control D, duplicate, and now this is called secondary text. Let's go back to our designer. And I'm going to select my primary text up here. I'm going to bind to primary text. I'm going to select my secondary text. I'm going to bind to secondary text. And now in our widget communicator, I will, from this widget type, because I've created this particular class, I can pull off here, and so I've saved this reference. This widget is of that class type that we just created. So I'll say set primary text, and I'll say set secondary text. And pull this off of here, pull this off of here. We'll make these a little bit neater. Awesome. So now we should have a functioning blueprint. Let's run through what we've done. So we have our widget zone. When the player or when an actor overlaps, it's going to test for a component that implements this interface that we've created. If it does, it's going to pass that on. And we're going to call an event on that component. On that component, we're going to make sure that the owner is our player. We're going to create this widget. We're going to set the variables of text on it, and which are bound to these text objects through variables that we've created. And then we're going to add it to the screen. And when we exit, it's going to do a similar process, and it's going to call to our widget communicator blueprint, which we have on the character. And assuming it's valid, it will tear it down, and then we have no more widget on our screen. So let's go back to our widget zone, and let's just make sure we have this is a primary text object. And we'll say, I'm just going to copy that and say, this is a secondary text object. And let's test this out. So I'll go to my environment, and I will add a new widget zone. Let's actually increase the size of this. So I'm going to make this 300 by 300 by 300. That being the case, I'm going to set it at 300 units in Z. So now it sits on the ground. And when I enter the volume, I'm going to see the text that I added. And so I improperly put in that second line. So let's redo that. So if I do that, you'll see it's going to say this is a secondary text object. Great. That looks awesome. So now let's make a practical example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a series of walls. So I'll go up to my shapes, and I'm going to drop this to the ground. I'm going to scale this upwards. And now I have a sort of 4-quadrant area. I'm just going to scale this box like this. And I'm going to select all 4 of these, and I'm going to say, you have entered. And we'll say the first one is going to say the kitchen. The second one is going to say the foyer. Third will say the garage. And the fourth one will say the bedroom. So now, when I press play, I'll enter each of these as if this is a door in a house, and it says you have entered the foyer. And I'll exit, say you have entered the bedroom. Again, the garage, and now it says you have entered the kitchen. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for more Unreal Engine 5 content.